Sarah Martinez walked through the dimly lit parking garage beneath the downtown shopping mall, her sneakers echoing softly against the concrete floor. The heavy bags in her hands contained groceries for the week ahead, and she was looking forward to getting home to her small apartment. At 28 years old, Sarah had learned to appreciate the quiet moments in life. After spending 6 years as a Navy SEAL, she now worked as a fitness instructor at a local gym, trying to build a peaceful civilian life. The parking garage was nearly empty at this late hour. Most shoppers had gone home hours ago, leaving only a few scattered cars under the flickering fluorescent lights. Sarah had stayed late at the gym, helping a new member learn proper form on the weight machines. She enjoyed helping people discover their strength, just as the military had helped her discover hers. As she approached her old Honda Civic, Sarah noticed 3 men leaning against a black pickup truck 2 spaces away. They appeared to be in their 20s, wearing expensive clothes and gold chains that caught the overhead lights. One of them, a tall man with bleached hair, was talking loudly on his phone while the other 2 laughed at something on their own devices. Sarah minded her own business, as she always did. She had learned in the military that unnecessary confrontation was usually avoidable if you stayed focused on your own mission. She clicked her key fob to unlock her car and began loading her grocery bags into the back seat. "Hey there, beautiful," called the tall man, ending his phone call. "You look like you could use some help with those heavy bags." Sarah glanced up briefly and offered a polite smile. "Thanks, but I'm fine," she said, continuing to arrange her groceries. She had dealt with this type of attention countless times before, and had learned that a friendly but firm response usually ended things quickly. The man pushed himself off the truck and took a few steps closer. His friends followed, creating a semicircle around Sarah's car. "Come on, don't be like that," he said, his voice taking on a more insistent tone. "We're just being friendly. Maybe we could buy you a drink somewhere." Sarah straightened up and faced them directly. Her posture remained relaxed, but her eyes were alert. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm heading home," she said calmly. "Have a good evening." She moved to get into her car, but the tall man stepped forward and placed his hand on the door, preventing her from closing it. "Wait a minute," he said, his friendly mask beginning to slip. "We're talking to you. Don't you think it's rude to just walk away?" Sarah's training kicked in automatically. She assessed the situation quickly. 3 men, all larger than her, positioned to block her exit routes. The parking garage was isolated and security cameras were sparse in this older building. She kept her voice steady and non-threatening. "I'm not trying to be rude," she said. "I just need to get home. Please move your hand so I can close my door." The second man, shorter but broader than his friend, laughed. "Look at this, she thinks she can give us orders." He moved closer, deliberately invading Sarah's personal space. "Maybe we need to teach her some manners." The third man, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Yeah, she needs to learn some respect." He was the largest of the 3, with muscular arms covered in tattoos. "Pretty girls like her think they're too good for guys like us." Sarah remained calm, but her mind was racing through her options. She could attempt to get back in her car, but they were positioned to prevent that. She could try to run, but they would likely catch her before she reached the exit. Her best option was to continue trying to de-escalate the situation. "Look, I don't have any problem with you guys," she said, keeping her hands visible and non-threatening. "I'm just tired and want to go home. There's no need for this to become a big deal." The tall man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, but it already is a big deal," he said. "You see, we don't like being disrespected. And walking away from us when we're trying to be nice? That's disrespectful." He reached out and grabbed Sarah's arm, his grip tight enough to leave marks. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to come have that drink with us and you're going to be a lot more friendly about it." Sarah looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried a weight that made all 3 men pause for a moment. "Let go of my arm," she said. The man's grip tightened instead. "Or what?" he challenged. "What are you going to do about it, little girl?" That was when Sarah made her decision. She had tried to avoid conflict, had given them multiple chances to walk away, but they had chosen to escalate the situation, and now they were about to discover that they had picked the wrong person to intimidate. Sarah's free hand moved with lightning speed, striking a pressure point on the man's wrist that caused him to immediately release her arm with a yelp of pain. Before he could react, she stepped back into a defensive stance that would have been familiar to any of her former Navy SEAL teammates. "That was your last warning," she said, her voice still calm but now carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "Walk away now and nobody gets hurt." The three men looked at each other in surprise. They had expected a frightened woman who would submit to their intimidation. Instead, they found themselves facing someone who clearly knew how to handle herself. But rather than taking the hint and leaving, their surprise quickly turned to anger. "Did she just threaten us?" the broad man asked, stepping forward aggressively. "I think she just threatened us." The tattooed man cracked his knuckles. "Nobody talks to us like that," he said. "Especially not some little gym bunny who thinks she knows karate." Sarah shook her head slightly. They still didn't understand what they were dealing with. She had hoped that her warning would be enough, but it was becoming clear that these men were determined to learn the hard way. Years of military training had taught her to read people quickly, and she could see in their eyes that they weren't going to back down. The tall man was shaking his hand, trying to work feeling back into his fingers. "You're going to pay for that," he snarled. "We were going to be nice about this, but now you've made it personal." Sarah settled into her stance, her weight balanced and her muscles relaxed but ready to explode into action. She had faced enemy combatants in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, but she had never wanted to hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. These men, however, were making that choice for her. "Last chance," she said quietly. "Walk away." Instead, they moved forward together, and Sarah realized that her peaceful evening was about to become something very different. The first man to reach Sarah was the broad, shorter one, who had been the most aggressive. He swung a wild haymaker at her head, putting all his weight behind the punch. To him, this was just another bar fight where size and aggression usually won the day. He had no idea he was attacking someone trained in hand-to-hand combat at the highest military level. Sarah ducked under his swing effortlessly, the punch passing harmlessly over her head. In the same fluid motion, she stepped forward and drove her elbow upward into his solar plexus. The strike was precise and devastating. The man doubled over, gasping for air that wouldn't come, his face turning red as he struggled to breathe. The tall man with bleached hair came at her from the left, trying to grab her in a bear hug while she was dealing with his friend. Sarah sensed his approach without even turning to look. As his arms reached for her, she spun low and swept his legs out from under him. He crashed to the concrete floor hard, his head bouncing off the ground with a sickening thud. The tattooed man, seeing his two friends taken down in seconds, hesitated for just a moment. That hesitation told Sarah everything she needed to know about his fighting experience. A trained fighter never hesitates, never gives their opponent time to think or position themselves. This man was used to intimidating people, not actually fighting them. "You want to keep going?" Sarah asked, straightening up and facing him directly. "Or are you smart enough to help your friends and leave?" But the tattooed man's pride was wounded. He couldn't accept that a woman half his size had just demolished his crew. With a roar of anger, he charged at her like a linebacker, trying to use his size advantage to overwhelm her with brute force. Sarah waited until he was almost on top of her, then stepped aside at the last second. As he stumbled past, unable to stop his momentum, she grabbed his arm and used his own force against him. A perfectly executed hip toss sent him flying through the air. He landed hard on his back, the impact driving all the air from his lungs. The entire fight had lasted less than 30 seconds. 3 grown men lay on the parking garage floor, groaning and struggling to catch their breath. Sarah stood over them, not even breathing hard. This had been easier than most of her training exercises back in the Navy. The broad man was the first to recover enough to speak. "What the hell are you?" he wheezed, still clutching his chest where Sarah's elbow had connected. "Someone you should have left alone," Sarah replied simply. She walked over to her car and grabbed her phone from her purse. "I'm calling the police. You 3 are going to explain to them why you thought it was okay to assault a woman in a parking garage." Wait, the tall man said, struggling to sit up. Blood trickled from a cut on the back of his head where it had hit the concrete. "You can't call the cops. We didn't really hurt you or anything." Sarah looked at him with disbelief. "You grabbed me against my will and threatened me. That's assault. The fact that you're terrible at it doesn't make it legal." The tattooed man rolled over onto his side, still trying to catch his breath. "Come on, lady. We were just having some fun. Nobody got seriously hurt." "Nobody got seriously hurt because I chose not to seriously hurt you," Sarah said, her finger hovering over the emergency call button. "But that can change very quickly if you keep talking." The 3 men exchanged glances. They were beginning to realize that they had made a catastrophic error in judgment. This wasn't some helpless victim they could intimidate and control. This was someone who could have easily put all three of them in the hospital if she had wanted to. "Look," the tall man said, trying a different approach. "Maybe we can work something out here. You don't call the cops and we'll make sure you never see us again. We'll even pay for any damage to your car or whatever." Sarah almost smiled at that. "Damage to my car? You three couldn't damage my car if I gave you a baseball bat and an hour to try." The broad man was slowly getting to his feet, moving carefully and keeping his hands visible. "Who are you?" he asked again. "I mean, what kind of training do you have?" "The kind that makes attacking me a very bad idea," Sarah answered. "The kind that means I could have done a lot worse to you than I did." She was telling the truth. Her Navy SEAL training had included dozens of ways to incapacitate or kill an opponent quickly and efficiently. The techniques she had used on these three men were among the gentlest in her arsenal. She could have easily broken bones, damaged joints, or worse. But despite their behavior, she had no desire to permanently injure them. The tattooed man finally managed to sit up, his face pale and sweaty. "You're military, aren't you?" he said. "Has to be. Nobody fights like that without serious training." Sarah didn't answer directly. "What I am is someone who knows how to defend herself. And what you three are is lucky that I'm not the kind of person who enjoys hurting people." The tall man touched the back of his head and looked at the blood on his fingers. "Jesus," he muttered. "We really picked the wrong person to mess with." "Yes, you did," Sarah agreed. "And now you have a choice to make. I can call the police and you can explain to them why you thought it was acceptable to assault a woman. Or you can get in your truck, drive away, and never come near me again." The three men looked at each other, having a silent conversation with their eyes. They were clearly weighing their options, trying to figure out which choice would cause them the least problems. "If we leave," the broad man said carefully, "you won't call the cops?" "If you leave right now and never bother me or anyone else like this again, I'll consider the matter closed," Sarah said. "But if I ever see you harassing another woman or if you ever come near me again, I won't be so generous next time." The threat in her voice was unmistakable. These men had gotten a small taste of what she was capable of, and none of them wanted to find out what she could do if she really tried to hurt them. The tattooed man struggled to his feet, moving like an old man despite being in his 20s. "We're leaving," he said. "We're definitely leaving." His two friends nodded quickly, both of them moving slowly and carefully as they got up from the concrete floor. They looked like they had been hit by a truck, which in a way they had been. As they started walking toward their pickup truck, the tall man turned back one more time. "For what it's worth," he said, "we're sorry. We didn't know." "You shouldn't have to know," Sarah interrupted. "You should treat everyone with respect, regardless of whether they can defend themselves or not." The man nodded, looking genuinely ashamed for the first time since the encounter began. "You're right," he said quietly. "We screwed up bad." Sarah watched as the three men climbed into their truck, moving like they had all aged 20 years in the last few minutes. The engine started and they drove slowly toward the exit, their taillights disappearing around the corner. Only then did Sarah allow herself to relax slightly. The immediate danger was over, but she knew that the real consequences of this encounter were just beginning. Sarah stood alone in the parking garage, her heart rate slowly returning to normal as the sound of the pickup truck faded into the distance. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the concrete pillars. She looked down at her hands, noticing they were completely steady. Years of training had taught her body to remain calm even in high-stress situations. She walked around her car, checking for any damage the men might have caused before the confrontation escalated. Everything looked fine. Her grocery bags were still sitting safely in the back seat. The milk probably still cold. It was strange how normal everything looked when just minutes ago this had been the scene of a violent encounter. As she got into her car, Sarah's mind began processing what had just happened. She had successfully defended herself without seriously injuring anyone, which was exactly what her training had taught her to do, use the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat. But she also knew that this incident would likely have consequences beyond the parking garage. The drive home gave her time to think. Those three men now knew that they had attacked someone with serious combat training. The question was, what would they do with that information? Some people learned from experiences like this and changed their behavior. Others became angry and resentful, looking for ways to get revenge. Sarah pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, a modest building in a quiet neighborhood. She had chosen this place specifically because it was peaceful and safe. After years of living in dangerous locations around the world, she valued the simple comfort of knowing she could sleep soundly at night. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, small but comfortable. Sarah had decorated it simply, with just a few mementos from her military service and some plants that she was slowly learning to keep alive. She put away her groceries mechanically, her mind still focused on the events of the evening. She considered calling the police to report what had happened, even though the men had left. But without witnesses or security footage, it would be her word against theirs, and since no one had been seriously injured, it was unlikely that much would come of it. Still, having a record of the incident might be useful if something similar happened in the future. Sarah decided to at least file a report online. She described the encounter factually, including the license plate number of the pickup truck that she had memorized during the confrontation. It was an old habit from her military days. Always notice and remember details that might be important later. The next morning, Sarah went to work at the gym as usual. The fitness zone was a mid-sized facility that catered to regular people trying to stay healthy, not hardcore bodybuilders or athletes. Sarah enjoyed working with clients who were just beginning their fitness journey, helping them discover what their bodies were capable of achieving. Her first appointment was with Margaret Chen, a 60-year-old woman who had started working out after her doctor warned her about her bone density. Margaret was one of Sarah's favorite clients because she approached each workout with determination and a sense of humor about her limitations. "You seem distracted today," Margaret observed as Sarah helped her adjust the weight machine. "Everything okay?" Sarah realized she had been thinking about the parking garage incident instead of focusing on her client. "Sorry, Margaret. I had a strange encounter last night. Nothing serious, but it's still on my mind." Margaret studied her trainer's face with the keen eye of someone who had raised 4 children and taught high school for 30 years. "Strange how?" she asked. Sarah briefly considered sharing the story but decided against it. Margaret didn't need to worry about parking garage safety. "Just some rude people who didn't know when to take no for an answer," she said. "Ah," Margaret nodded knowingly. "Men?" "Yeah," Sarah confirmed. "They can be particularly dense about that sort of thing," Margaret said, beginning her arm exercises. "I hope you told them exactly what you thought of their behavior." "Something like that," Sarah replied with a small smile. The rest of the morning passed normally. Sarah worked with 3 more clients, taught a group fitness class, and spent some time updating workout plans on the computer. The familiar routine helped push the previous night's events to the back of her mind. During her lunch break, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated for a moment before answering, wondering if somehow the men from last night had gotten her number. "Hello," she said cautiously. "Is this Sarah Martinez?" The voice was professional, official sounding. "Yes, this is Sarah. This is Detective Williams with the Metro Police Department. I'm calling about an incident report you filed last night regarding an assault in a downtown parking garage." Sarah was surprised. She hadn't expected such a quick response to her online report. "Yes, that's correct. Ms. Martinez, I'd like to speak with you in person about what happened. Would you be available to come to the station this afternoon?" "Is there a problem with my report?" Sarah asked. "Not with your report, no. But we've had some interesting developments that I think you should know about. Can you be here at 2 o'clock? Sarah checked her schedule. Her next client wasn't until 4. "Yes, I can make that work." Detective Williams gave her directions to the station and thanked her for calling in the incident. After hanging up, Sarah wondered what kind of developments could have occurred so quickly. Had the 3 men been arrested for something else? Had they filed a counter-complaint against her? The police station was a modern building downtown, not far from where the incident had occurred. Sarah arrived a few minutes early and was directed to Detective Williams' desk in the busy main office area. The detective was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and tired eyes that suggested she had seen too much of humanity's darker side. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming in," Detective Williams said, gesturing to a chair beside her desk. "I have to say your report made for interesting reading." "How so?" Sarah asked, settling into the chair. "Well, it's not often we get a report where 3 men attack one woman, and the woman walks away without a scratch while all 3 men end up injured." The detective's tone was neutral, but Sarah could sense she was being evaluated. "I defended myself," Sarah said simply. "They attacked me and I fought back." "Oh, I believe you," Detective Williams said quickly. In fact, that's why I wanted to talk to you. You see, about 2 hours after you filed your report, all 3 of those men showed up at the hospital emergency room. Sarah felt a chill of concern. Are they seriously injured? I tried to use minimal force. Minimal force? The detective raised an eyebrow. Ms. Martinez, one of them has a concussion, another has bruised ribs, and the third has a sprained wrist. What would you consider maximum force? Sarah realized she was in a delicate situation. The detective was clearly trying to determine whether she had used excessive force in defending herself. Detective Williams, I used exactly as much force as necessary to stop 3 men from assaulting me. Nothing more, nothing less. The detective studied her for a long moment. What's your background, Ms. Martinez? The way you described the incident and looking at the results, you clearly have some serious training. Sarah had been dreading this question. Her military service wasn't something she liked to broadcast, but she wasn't going to lie to a police officer. I served in the Navy for 6 years, she said. What did you do in the Navy? I was a special operations member. Detective Williams leaned back in her chair. Special operations? As in Navy SEALs? Yes, ma'am. The detective was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she leaned forward again. Ms. Martinez, those 3 men didn't just go to the hospital. They also came here to file a complaint against you for assault. Sarah's stomach dropped. What? They claim you attacked them unprovoked in the parking garage. They say they were just trying to help you with your groceries when you went crazy and started hitting them. Sarah stared at the detective in disbelief. After everything that had happened, after she had given them the chance to walk away, they had chosen to file false charges against her. The decision she had to make next would determine the course of everything that followed. Sarah felt her jaw tighten as she processed what Detective Williams had just told her. The 3 men who had threatened and assaulted her were now claiming to be the victims. It was a twisted version of events that made her question whether she had been too lenient with them the night before. Detective Williams, Sarah said carefully, do you believe their version of events? The detective leaned back in her chair and studied Sarah's face. Ms. Martinez, I've been doing this job for 18 years. I've seen a lot of assault cases, and I've gotten pretty good at reading people. When those 3 men came in here this morning, they looked like they'd been through a meat grinder. But they also looked scared. Scared of what? Scared of you, Detective Williams said bluntly. They kept looking over their shoulders like they expected you to walk through the door and finish what you started. That's not how innocent victims usually behave. Sarah felt a small sense of relief, but she knew she wasn't out of trouble yet.
So what happens now?
Well, technically I have to investigate both complaints, but I also have to consider the evidence. Detective Williams opened a folder on her desk. For instance, the medical reports from the hospital show that all 3 men have injuries consistent with defensive wounds, not offensive ones. The concussion came from falling backward, not from being struck in the face. The bruised ribs are from an upward elbow strike, which is a classic defensive move, and the sprained wrist has pressure point damage, not impact damage. Sarah was impressed by the detective's analysis. You know a lot about combat techniques. I was Army military police before I became a civilian cop, Detective Williams explained. I recognize the work of someone with serious training. The question is whether you used reasonable force to defend yourself. I used the minimum force necessary to stop them from hurting me, Sarah said firmly. If I had wanted to seriously injure them, they would be in intensive care right now, not the emergency room. Detective Williams nodded. That's what I figured. Which brings me to my next question. Do you want to press charges against them for assault? Sarah considered this carefully. Part of her wanted to see them face consequences for their actions, but another part of her just wanted the whole thing to go away so she could return to her quiet life. What would happen if I pressed charges? She asked. Well, given their injuries and their attempts to file false charges against you, they'd probably be looking at assault, battery, and filing a false police report. That could mean jail time, especially if any of them have prior records. Do they have prior records? Detective Williams smiled grimly. All 3 of them. The tall one, Derek Morrison, has been arrested twice for bar fights. The short one, Kevin Nash, has a domestic violence charge from 2 years ago. And the big guy with the tattoos, Marcus Thompson, has assault charges and a restraining order from an ex-girlfriend. Sarah felt her anger rising. These weren't just 3 guys who had made a bad decision in a parking garage. They were repeat offenders who made a habit of intimidating and hurting people, especially women. What happens to their complaint against me? Sarah asked. Given their records and the evidence, I'm recommending that their complaint be dismissed as unfounded. The DA's office will make the final decision, but I don't think you have anything to worry about there. Sarah nodded, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. And if I decide not to press charges against them? Then they walk away from this with nothing more than some medical bills and hopefully a lesson learned. But Ms. Martinez, I have to tell you, guys like this don't usually learn their lessons the first time. The detective's words echoed Sarah's own thoughts from the night before. She had given them a chance to walk away and learn from their mistake, and instead they had tried to turn the legal system against her. How many other women had they intimidated who didn't have the training to defend themselves? I need some time to think about it, Sarah said. Of course. But don't take too long. There's a statute of limitations on this and evidence gets stale quickly. Detective Williams handed Sarah a business card. Call me when you've made your decision. Sarah drove back to the gym in a conflicted state of mind. She had joined the Navy to serve and protect people, and her SEAL training had been focused on eliminating threats to innocent people. These 3 men were clearly a threat to women in the community. But using the legal system against them felt different from the direct action she was trained for. At the gym, she threw herself into her work, trying to clear her head through physical activity. She taught an afternoon kickboxing class with more intensity than usual, and her students noticed the difference. Wow, Sarah, said Janet, one of her regular students. You're really bringing the energy today. Whatever's motivating you, I like it. Sarah realized she had been imagining the faces of the 3 men from the parking garage on the heavy bags. It wasn't a healthy way to process her feelings, but it was effective. After work, Sarah went home and did something she rarely allowed herself to do. She called her former commanding officer, Captain Rebecca Stone. Captain Stone had been Sarah's mentor during her time with the SEALs, and she was one of the few people who truly understood the challenges of transitioning from military to civilian life. Sarah, it's good to hear from you, Captain Stone said warmly. How's civilian life treating you? It's complicated, Sarah said, and proceeded to tell her former commander about the events of the last 24 hours. Captain Stone listened without interrupting, asking only a few clarifying questions. When Sarah finished, there was a long pause before the captain spoke. Sarah, do you remember what I always told you about mission parameters? Complete the mission with minimal collateral damage, Sarah recited automatically. Right, and what was your mission last night? Sarah thought about it. To defend myself and get home safely. Mission accomplished. No collateral damage. Textbook execution. Captain Stone's tone became more serious. But now you have a new mission and it's more complicated than the first one. What do you mean? Your new mission is to decide whether to stop these men from hurting other people. That's not a military decision anymore, Sarah. That's a civilian decision, and you have to make it based on civilian rules and civilian consequences. Sarah knew her former commander was right. This wasn't a combat situation where the rules of engagement were clear. This was a complex moral and legal decision that would affect not just her own life, but potentially the lives of other women these men might encounter in the future. What would you do? Sarah asked. I can't make that decision for you, Captain Stone said gently, but I will say this. You didn't spend 6 years learning to protect people just so you could walk away when protection was needed. After hanging up the phone, Sarah sat in her quiet apartment and thought about all the women who might cross paths with Derek Morrison, Kevin Nash, and Marcus Thompson in the future. Women who might not have the training or the ability to defend themselves. Women who might become victims because she chose to let their attackers walk away without consequences. The decision, when it came to her, was actually quite simple. She picked up Detective Williams' business card and reached for her phone. Some fights were worth finishing even if you didn't start them. Sarah dialed Detective Williams' number the next morning, her decision firm in her mind. She had spent the night thinking about all the potential victims these 3 men might encounter if they faced no consequences for their actions. The choice was clear. Detective Williams, this is Sarah Martinez. I want to press charges against all 3 men. I was hoping you'd say that, the detective replied. Can you come in this morning to give a formal statement? I'll be there in an hour. At the police station, Sarah provided a detailed account of everything that had happened in the parking garage. Detective Williams recorded her statement and had her sign several documents. The legal process was now officially in motion. What happens next? Sarah asked. We'll issue arrest warrants for all three men. Given their prior records and the evidence, I expect they'll be in custody by this evening. The DA's office will likely offer them plea deals, but that's out of our hands now. Sarah nodded. And their complaint against me? Officially dismissed as of an hour ago. The DA took one look at their records and your statement and threw it out. As Sarah left the police station, she felt a sense of satisfaction that she had done the right thing. But she also knew that this was far from over. Derek Morrison, Kevin Nash, and Marcus Thompson would soon discover that their attempt to intimidate the wrong woman was going to cost them much more than a few bumps and bruises. That afternoon, while Sarah was teaching a seniors fitness class at the gym, her phone buzzed with a text from Detective Williams. All three suspects in custody. Wanted to let you know. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had been unconsciously worried that the three men might try to retaliate before they were arrested. Now they would be dealing with the legal system instead of plotting revenge. The story might have ended there, with three bullies facing the consequences of their actions and learning a valuable lesson about picking their targets more carefully. But Derek Morrison, Kevin Nash, and Marcus Thompson were not the type of men who learned lessons easily. 2 weeks later, Detective Williams called Sarah with disturbing news. Ms. Martinez, I need to inform you that all three defendants made bail yesterday. Sarah felt a chill of concern. How is that possible? I thought they had serious charges against them. They do, but they also have expensive lawyers now. Derek Morrison's father apparently owns several car dealerships in the area, and he posted bail for all three of them. What does this mean for me? It means you need to be careful. I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily, but men like this sometimes blame the victim for their legal troubles instead of taking responsibility for their own actions. Detective Williams was right to be concerned. That very evening, as Sarah was locking up the gym after her last class, she noticed a familiar black pickup truck parked across the street. Three figures sat inside, their faces barely visible in the darkness. Sarah calmly walked to her car, keeping her movements normal while mentally preparing for another confrontation. She had hoped that their arrest would have taught them to stay away from her, but apparently they were even more foolish than she had initially thought. As she drove home, the pickup truck followed at a distance. Sarah took several unnecessary turns to confirm that she was being followed, then made a decision that her SEAL training had ingrained in her. Never lead a threat to your home base. Instead of driving to her apartment, Sarah headed toward the police station downtown. If these three men wanted another confrontation, they could have it in front of the building where Detective Williams worked. The pickup truck followed her for several blocks before the driver apparently realized where she was leading them. Sarah watched in her rearview mirror as the truck suddenly turned down a side street and disappeared. She continued to the police station anyway and parked in the well-lit visitor parking area. Sarah called Detective Williams from her car. They're following me, she said without preamble. Who's following you? Morrison, Nash, and Thompson. They followed me from the gym in the same black pickup truck from the original incident. Detective Williams sighed heavily. Those idiots. Did they try to approach you? No, they just followed me. When I headed toward the police station, they turned off and disappeared. Smart move on your part. Do you want to file a restraining order? Sarah considered this. A restraining order was just a piece of paper, and she doubted it would stop men who were already facing assault charges from harassing her further. Will it actually protect me? Honestly, probably not, but it will give us more charges to hit them with when they violate it, and they will violate it. Then yes, let's do it. The next morning, Sarah met with a prosecutor from the DA's office to discuss both the restraining order and the assault charges. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer Walsh, explained that the three men's lawyers were pushing for a plea deal. They want to plead down to misdemeanor harassment with community service and anger management classes, Walsh said. No jail time, no felony records. Sarah felt her anger rising. After what they did to me and now they're stalking me? The stalking incident helps our case significantly, Walsh assured her. I was inclined to take the plea deal before, but now I think we should push for the full felony assault charges. These men clearly haven't learned their lesson. What does that mean in terms of consequences? If convicted on felony assault, they're looking at 1 to 3 years in prison each, plus substantial fines. Their lawyers know this, which is why they're getting desperate. That afternoon, the restraining order was officially served on all three men. They were ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from Sarah, her home, and her workplace. Violating the order would result in immediate arrest. For a few days, things seemed to return to normal. Sarah went to work, taught her classes, and tried to put the whole incident behind her. But she remained alert, scanning parking lots and checking her mirrors more frequently than usual. The violation of the restraining order came exactly 1 week after it was issued. Sarah was leaving the grocery store late one evening when she spotted Kevin Nash, the short, broad man from the original incident, standing near her car. He was alone, but his presence was clearly intentional. Sarah stopped walking and pulled out her phone, keeping Nash in sight while she called 911. 911, what's your emergency? This is Sarah Martinez. I have a restraining order against Kevin Nash and he's currently violating it. He's standing next to my car in the parking lot of the West Side grocery store. Officers are on the way, ma'am. Are you in immediate danger? Sarah looked at Nash, who was now staring directly at her with a smug expression on his face. He knew she had seen him and he was making no effort to leave. He's not directly threatening me, but he's clearly violating the court order, Sarah said. Nash started walking toward her slowly and deliberately. He stopped about 10 feet away, just close enough to be intimidating but far enough to claim he wasn't threatening her. You think you're so tough, Nash called out, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. You think you can ruin our lives and just walk away? The police are already on their way, Sarah said calmly. You should leave now. Nash laughed, but there was no humor in it. Or what? You'll beat me up again? Go ahead. I've got my phone recording everything. One more assault charge and you'll be the one going to jail. Sarah realized that Nash was trying to provoke her into attacking him while he recorded it. It was a crude plan, but it might work if she lost her temper. The smart move was to wait for the police and let Nash dig his own grave deeper. I'm not going to attack you, Kevin, Sarah said, using his first name to establish that she knew exactly who he was. I'm just going to stand here and wait for the officers to arrest you for violating a court order. Nash's confident expression faltered slightly. He had expected Sarah to either run away in fear or attack him in anger. Her calm response clearly wasn't part of his plan. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air, and Nash looked around nervously. He was trapped between his desire to intimidate Sarah and his knowledge that he was about to be arrested. This isn't over, he said, backing away toward the parking lot exit. Yes, it is, Sarah replied quietly. But as she watched Nash disappear into the darkness, she realized that the three men were becoming more desperate and therefore more dangerous. The legal system was working, but it was also pushing them toward increasingly reckless behavior. When the police arrived, Sarah gave them a detailed account of the incident. Nash was long gone, but the violation was clearly documented. Detective Williams arrived shortly after the patrol officers and spoke with Sarah privately. This changes everything, the detective said. Nash just turned a possible plea deal into a guaranteed prison sentence. Judge Harrison hates it when people violate restraining orders in her courtroom. What about Morrison and Thompson? Are they going to try something similar? I don't know, but we're going to be ready for them if they do. I'm arranging for increased patrols in your neighborhood and around the gym. As Sarah drove home that night, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that evening in the parking garage. She had been looking forward to a quiet civilian life, but it seemed that her past training was still very much relevant to her present circumstances. The three men had made their choice to escalate the situation at every possible opportunity. Now they would have to live with the consequences of those choices, and Sarah suspected those consequences were about to become much more severe than they had originally imagined. The trial date was set for 6 weeks later, and in the time leading up to it, Derek Morrison and Marcus Thompson seemed to learn from Kevin Nash's mistake. They stayed away from Sarah completely, following their lawyer's advice to avoid any contact that might make their legal situation worse. Nash, meanwhile, was back in jail after violating the restraining order. His bail had been revoked and he would remain in custody until the trial. His lawyers tried to argue that the violation was accidental, but the prosecution had security, camera footage from the grocery store parking lot that clearly showed Nash deliberately positioning himself near Sarah's car and then approaching her. Sarah continued her normal routine, but she remained vigilant. Detective Williams had warned her that desperate people sometimes did desperate things, and the closer the trial date came, the more pressure Morrison and Thompson would feel. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. Detective Williams called Sarah 3 weeks before the trial with surprising news. We've got them on more than just your assault, the detective said. Remember Marcus Thompson's ex-girlfriend? The one who had the restraining order against him? Yes. She saw the news coverage about your case and decided to come forward. Thompson violated his restraining order against her 6 times in the last month, and she has evidence. Photos, text messages, voice recordings. He's been stalking and threatening her. Sarah felt a mix of satisfaction and concern. Satisfaction that Thompson was facing additional consequences for his behavior, but concern for the other woman who had been suffering in silence. Is she okay? She's scared, but she's brave. Says your case gave her the courage to speak up. Her name is Rebecca Torres, and she wants to meet you. 2 days later, Sarah met Rebecca at a coffee shop downtown. Rebecca was a petite woman in her late 20s with long dark hair and tired eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. I wanted to thank you, Rebecca said as they sat down with their coffee. When I saw on the news that someone had finally stood up to Marcus and his friends, I realized I didn't have to keep hiding. How long has he been harassing you? Sarah asked. Ever since I broke up with him 8 months ago. He couldn't accept that I didn't want to be with him anymore. The restraining order just made him more creative about how he contacted me. Rebecca showed Sarah some of the evidence she had given to the police. Text messages that ranged from pleading to threatening. Photos of Thompson sitting in his car outside her apartment at all hours. Voice recordings of him calling her workplace and demanding to speak with her. This is serious stalking, Sarah said, studying the evidence. He's escalating. That's what Detective Williams said. She thinks he might try to do something before the trial. Sarah felt a familiar sense of responsibility settling over her. This woman was in danger partly because Sarah's case had pushed Thompson into more desperate behavior. Rebecca, do you have somewhere safe you can stay until this is over? My sister lives across town. I've been staying with her most nights, but I can't keep disrupting her life forever. Your life is more important than convenience, Sarah said firmly. Stay with your sister. Don't go anywhere alone, and call me if anything happens. Sarah gave Rebecca her phone number and they exchanged contact information. As they parted ways, Sarah had the uncomfortable feeling that this situation was far from over. Her instincts proved correct 3 days later. Sarah was at the gym early in the morning, opening up for the day shift when her phone rang. It was Rebecca and she sounded terrified. Sarah, he's here. Marcus is outside my apartment building right now. I can see him from my sister's window. Are you safe where you are? I think so, but I'm scared. My sister had to go to work early, so I'm alone. Call 911 right now, Sarah said, grabbing her keys and heading for the door. I'm on my way. No, don't come here. That's probably what he wants. He might be trying to draw you out. Sarah paused at the gym entrance. Rebecca was right. This could be a trap designed to lure Sarah into a confrontation on Thompson's terms rather than hers. Okay, but I'm calling Detective Williams. Stay on the phone with me until the police arrive. Sarah called the detective on her second phone while keeping Rebecca on the line with her first. Within minutes, Detective Williams had dispatched patrol cars to Rebecca's location and was on her way to coordinate the response. He's leaving, Rebecca said suddenly. He just got in his car and drove away. The police should still check the area, Sarah said. He might just be circling the block. When the police arrived, they found evidence that Thompson had been there for hours. Cigarette butts near Rebecca's building and a fast food bag with a receipt time-stamped from late the night before. He had been conducting surveillance, watching and waiting for an opportunity. Detective Williams called Sarah an hour later with an update. We have enough evidence to arrest Thompson for multiple violations of his restraining order. We're putting out a warrant for him now. What about Morrison? Is he involved in this? We don't know yet, but we're keeping an eye on him too. These guys seem to think they can intimidate their way out of legal trouble. Thompson was arrested later that day at his apartment. Unlike Nash, who had seemed almost relieved to be caught, Thompson was angry and defiant. He demanded to speak with his lawyer and refused to answer any questions about his activities. With 2 of the 3 men now in custody, Sarah hoped that the worst was over. But Derek Morrison was still free, and according to Detective Williams, he was the most intelligent and potentially dangerous of the 3. Morrison is different from his friends, the detective explained during a phone call that evening. Nash and Thompson are bullies who rely on intimidation and physical force. Morrison is more calculating. He plans things out. What does that mean for my safety? It means we need to be extra careful. Morrison knows that his friends got caught because they acted impulsively. If he tries something, it'll be more sophisticated. Detective Williams was right to be concerned. The next morning, Sarah discovered that someone had been in her apartment while she was at work the day before. Nothing was missing, and there were no signs of forced entry, but small things were out of place. A book moved slightly on her coffee table. A kitchen cabinet left partially open that she was certain she had closed. Her bathroom door, which she always kept closed, was open just a crack. Sarah called Detective Williams immediately. "Someone was in my apartment yesterday. Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Whoever it was wanted me to know they had been here without making it obvious to anyone else." The detective arrived with a crime scene technician, who dusted for fingerprints and looked for any other evidence of intrusion. They found signs that the lock on Sarah's door had been picked by someone with considerable skill. "This is Morrison," Detective Williams said grimly. "Breaking and entering, stalking, intimidation. We need to get him off the streets before he escalates further." But when the police went to arrest Derek Morrison, they discovered that he had disappeared. His apartment was empty, his car was gone, and his father claimed not to know where he was. "He's gone underground," Detective Williams told Sarah. "But he's not done with you. Men like Morrison don't just give up and walk away." Sarah realized that her quiet civilian life was about to become much more complicated. Derek Morrison was out there somewhere planning something, and she would need to use every bit of her Navy SEAL training to stay ahead of him. The hunter had become the hunted. But Derek Morrison was about to discover that Sarah Martinez was not the helpless prey he imagined her to be. She had survived combat missions in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, and she was not about to be intimidated by one angry man with a grudge. Derek Morrison had been missing for 3 days when Sarah decided to take the initiative. Her Navy SEAL training had taught her that waiting passively for an enemy to attack was almost always the wrong strategy. If Morrison wanted to play cat and mouse, she would show him what it felt like to be the mouse. Sarah began by doing what she did best: gathering intelligence. She used her civilian networks and some carefully placed phone calls to learn everything she could about Derek Morrison's background, his habits, and his likely hiding places. Morrison's father owned Morrison Auto Group, a chain of car dealerships throughout the metro area. Derek had worked at various dealerships over the years, never holding a position for very long due to his attitude problems. He had been fired from his last job 2 months before the parking garage incident for sexually harassing female employees. More importantly, Sarah discovered that Morrison had a hunting cabin in the mountains about 2 hours outside the city. The property was registered under his father's name, but Derek had been using it as a private retreat for years. If he was hiding somewhere while planning his next move, the cabin was the most likely location. Sarah called Detective Williams with her findings. "I think I know where Morrison is hiding." "Sarah, please tell me you're not thinking about going after him yourself." "I'm thinking about providing you with actionable intelligence so you can arrest him before he hurts someone." Detective Williams sighed. "Give me the address, we'll check it out." But when the police arrived at the hunting cabin the next day, they found it empty. Morrison had been there recently. There were fresh food containers and signs of recent habitation, but he was gone. He had either seen them coming or had never intended to stay in one place for very long. "He's smarter than I gave him credit for," Detective Williams admitted when she called Sarah with the update. "But now we know he's definitely out there planning something." That evening, Sarah was locking up the gym when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Taped to the inside of her car's windshield was a single piece of paper with a message written in block letters. "You destroyed my life. Now I'm going to destroy yours." Sarah looked around the parking lot carefully, but Morrison was nowhere to be seen. He had managed to get close enough to her car to leave the message without being detected. Her respect for his tactical abilities increased significantly, even as her concern for her safety grew. She called Detective Williams immediately, and within an hour the gym's parking lot was swarming with police officers and crime scene technicians. They found no useful evidence. Morrison had been careful not to leave fingerprints or DNA on the note. "This changes the threat level significantly," Detective Williams said. "He's moved from harassment to direct threats. I'm recommending that you consider relocating temporarily until we can apprehend him." Sarah considered this suggestion seriously. Morrison clearly had skills she hadn't anticipated, and he was motivated by revenge rather than simple intimidation. But running away felt wrong to her. She had never retreated from a fight in the military, and she wasn't about to start now. "I'm not leaving," Sarah said firmly, "but I am going to change my tactics." That night, Sarah transformed her apartment into a defensive position. She installed motion sensors, upgraded her door locks, and set up a surveillance system that would alert her phone if anyone approached her building. She also prepared what she privately called her go bag, a backpack with essential supplies that would allow her to leave quickly if the situation required it. Most importantly, Sarah developed a new daily routine that would make it much harder for Morrison to predict her movements. She varied her routes to and from work, changed her schedule randomly, and started working out at different times each day. If Morrison was watching her, she would make sure he couldn't establish a pattern. The psychological warfare continued for 2 weeks. Morrison left messages for Sarah in increasingly creative ways, written on the mirrors in the gym's bathroom, slipped under her apartment door, even carved into the paint of her car with a sharp object. Each message was more threatening than the last, but Morrison himself remained invisible. Detective Williams was frustrated by their inability to catch him. "He's treating this like a military operation," she complained during one of their regular check-ins. "He's using surveillance, counter-surveillance, and psychological tactics. Where did a car salesman learn this stuff?" Sarah had been wondering the same thing. Derek Morrison's behavior suggested training that went far beyond what most civilians possessed. She decided to dig deeper into his background. What she found surprised her. Morrison had served 4 years in the Army before joining his father's business. He had been a scout in an infantry division, which explained his surveillance skills and his ability to move unseen. He had received an other-than-honorable discharge for conduct issues, which probably explained why he had never mentioned his military service during his civilian career. "He's not just some angry civilian," Sarah told Detective Williams. "He's a veteran with military training. That's why he's been so hard to catch." This revelation changed everything. Morrison wasn't just a stalker with a grudge. He was a trained soldier who had turned his skills against a civilian target. The police were equipped to handle ordinary criminals, but Morrison was operating on a different level. The final confrontation came on a rainy Thursday evening 2 weeks later. Sarah was leaving the gym after teaching her last class of the day, when she realized that Morrison had finally made his move. Her car wouldn't start. Someone had tampered with the engine. The parking lot lights had been turned off, leaving the area in near total darkness. And most ominously, her cell phone had no signal. Morrison had chosen his moment carefully. The gym was closed, the parking lot was isolated, and Sarah's ability to call for help had been neutralized. He had studied her patterns and prepared the battlefield to his advantage. Sarah activated the small emergency beacon she had started carrying, a device that would alert Detective Williams to her location, even without cell phone service. Then she prepared herself for what was coming. "I know you're out there, Derek," she called into the darkness. "Why don't you come out and face me directly instead of playing these games?" Morrison's voice came from somewhere in the shadows near the back of the parking lot. "You think you're so tough, don't you? You think your military training makes you invincible?" "I think you're a coward who attacks women in parking garages," Sarah replied, slowly moving toward better defensive positioning near a concrete pillar. "Your military record shows you were discharged for conduct problems. Let me guess. You couldn't handle taking orders from people who were better soldiers than you." Morrison's laugh was cold and bitter. "Better soldiers? You don't know anything about what I went through, about what I sacrificed for this country." "I know you threw it all away because you couldn't control your temper," Sarah said. "Just like you're throwing away your freedom now because you can't accept that your actions have consequences." Morrison stepped out of the shadows, and Sarah could see that he was carrying something in his right hand. In the dim light, she couldn't tell if it was a weapon, but she had to assume it was. "I lost everything because of you," Morrison said, his voice filled with rage. "My job, my friends, my future. Now you're going to lose everything too." Sarah shifted into a combat stance, her weight balanced and her muscles ready to explode into action. "Derek, you lost everything because you chose to assault an innocent woman. I just defended myself. Everything that happened after that was a consequence of your own choices." Morrison raised his hand, and Sarah could see that he was holding a knife. "Enough talking," he snarled. "It's time to finish what we started in that parking garage. As Morrison charged toward her across the dark parking lot, Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her. This was what she had been trained for, a life-or-death confrontation with a dangerous enemy. Derek Morrison had spent weeks trying to intimidate and terrorize her, but now he was about to discover that he had picked a fight with someone who was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The final lesson was about to begin, and Derek Morrison was going to learn why you should never underestimate a Navy SEAL, even one who just wanted to live a quiet civilian life.